Okay, well, let me then introduce to you guys Dr. Todd Brashears. He's at Texas Tech, been a friend of mine for a long time. He was nice enough to agree to meet with us this morning and talk with us about entrepreneurial activity and his experience with that, which I think is kind of unique in departments of ag education. I'll let him tell you about that. But the topic that I thought he could really maybe help us with is how do you form those sort of synergistic relationships between labs and colleges as diverse as his or ours. And, how can that come together? Well, Dr. Brashears just came in, Todd. He's over here, so another familiar face. And with that, we'll just kind of let you take it away, Todd.
Okay, appreciate it. Thanks for having me, Tim. Dr. Brashears, did you have a birthday here recently? What are you, 40, 42, 40, 42? Okay, I thought so. Well, it looks like y'all had food somewhere as well.
I just got a piece of candy on the way down.
Well, Tim, thanks for having me. I hope that as I sit here and ramble on today, that y'all find something valuable and something that you can take and apply to what you're doing, or especially if you're a doctoral student, I think this will probably be more appropriate. If you're a master's student, then you're going to get a little bit of a better grasp of what research looks like in the field once you get away from your classroom and research methods course. So, Tim, if it's okay with you, what I'm going to do for most of the time is talk about what I do and how I do it, because like you said, I'm a little bit different than most of those in ag education. And as we get to the end, I'll talk about how we've built those relationships and some suggestions for those going into the profession to do so as well. I, like a lot of people who are in ag education now, I came through a teaching track and really wanted to be an ag teacher, and felt like that was really my calling in life. My mom was a high school teacher, and I really appreciated the things that she was able to do and the people that she was able to touch. And I went to school at Oklahoma State, did my student teaching there, and got my first teaching job in Nebraska, and spent 5 years just outside of Lincoln, Nebraska, teaching high school there. It's very much a different animal in the Midwest than it is in Texas and even Oklahoma. It's very much centered on student development, leadership development, and shop activities. And the stock show experience, the judging experience is very limited. And so I had a real eye-opening experience going from what I knew growing up to that type of environment. But I enjoy teaching and really like the opportunity to get involved in kids' lives. And when I decided to go back and get my doctorate degree, it was really a decision based on being able to expand my circle of influence and not just deal with a class of 20 students, but deal with 20 student teachers who would then go and deal with 20 students each. And so that was really my thought process, and really wanted to work specifically with student teachers. Like probably some of you have discovered, once you go back to grad school, some of your thoughts and what you wanted to do tends to shift, and you realize that there's a bigger world than just what you had in mind. I really had no concept of all the things that people do in ag education. In my limited scope, it was really about student teachers and classrooms and high school students and FFA. Luckily, I fell into a situation where I was given an opportunity to see some other stuff. So right now, I've been at Tech for 10 years. I'm a tenured faculty member, associate professor. My role here is running our ag leadership program. It's certainly nothing like A&M's. We have about 75 students in our degree plan. I advise all of those, teach most of the classes, although I have some PhD students who help me with some of the undergraduate classes. And I'm pretty much the resident tech guy. We don't have an IT person, so anything electronic, if it's broke, it typically comes to me for whatever reason. So that's kind of the role I feel as far as officially on paper. That's what my contract says. I'm 100% teaching 9 months out of the year. And that's what all the contracts at Texas Tech are. If you want to get paid for the summer, you have to teach in the summer. Opportunities to do that are pretty limited. And so not everyone has the chance to do summer teaching. And so because of that, I really, as soon as I started looking for ways that I was going to be able to pay myself or come up with funds to pay myself. And one of the things that most universities will do is, if you're on less than a 12-month contract, they will allow you to pay your own summer salary with grant money. And so that's what a lot of people at Texas Tech and other universities do. I know that A&M is shifting toward a system similar to that, although not as dramatic with a 9-month contract. Gary, y'all are going to 11 or 10 and a half or something like that? 10-month contract.
We have gone to 10.
So when you start talking about covering 2 months of salary, you get very entrepreneurial about ways to raise funds, and you begin to get creative. One of the things that I did when I was in Nebraska, I started working on my doctorate degree, and one of the summer courses they offered was a guy named John Ruckdown, who is a food scientist and was trying to get food science in the high schools in Nebraska. And so he offered a class for high school ag teachers on how to teach food science. And there weren't a lot of options. It wasn't something I was really interested in, but I went and took the class because I needed the credit hours. And it turned out I really enjoyed it. I ended up teaching several semesters courses in food science in our high school. At the time, it was a class that counted as a science credit. So it worked out really well for the students and gave me a little background information that would turn out to help me a great deal as I went into my career. So currently now what I do in addition to teaching is primarily work with multidisciplinary groups who write grants to USDA, FAS, Foreign Ag Service, NSF, USAID, government, federal sources of funding to provide money for research. Now, the faculty will tell you there is very little external funding sources for education. They're just, if you start looking for federal dollars for educational research, you're really going to struggle to find it. You have things like challenge grants that are available. One of the problems with challenge grants is you have to match the money. So if they give you $250,000, you have to come up with $250,000 on your own. That doesn't help much as far as trying to raise my summer salary, because if I had $250,000 on my own, I wouldn't have to worry about it to begin with. So I started working with a group of people that I knew, and I was very lucky to have contact, as my wife is in food science, and she was able to introduce me to some people that I got heavily involved with. And my background as far as teaching some food science gave me a little bit of the terminology that I would need. Now, I am by no means a hard scientist. I can talk a little bit about bacteria. I can talk a lot about E. coli and salmonella, but only on the surface. I really don't understand it. I know what people mean when they talk about those things, but I certainly cannot pretend like I'm in that realm at all. Those people are on a completely different level than I am. But what we have found is in the last several years that USDA especially has gotten away from hard science grants and have gone to what's called integrative grants. And the terminology changes almost every year. Now they're within the AFRI program, and when they present a integrated grant opportunity, what it means is that you have to involve people from hard sciences, extension, and or education. You have to pick 2 of those 3 components to include in your grant. What we found is hard sciences is a requirement, and so then you have to involve either extension or education. One of the things that I've been able to do that seems to be pretty helpful, pretty successful, is has been getting away from education as a production group. Early on in my career, I had people come to me and say, we have to do this integrated grant, and they want an education person on it. Can you make a website? Or can you produce some extension publications? And it was really almost like a curriculum. I was in production mode, just doing work. And what we have shifted to now is integrating our educational research into these projects. And I'll talk more about that in just a little bit. So currently what I'm working on 4 USDA integrated grants. We have nicknames for them because if you've ever looked at dissertation titles, that's kind of what a USDA grant title looks like. So I have an AMR grant, which is a grant with Kansas State on antimicrobial resistance. I know nothing about that. I'm on what I call cow-calf grant, where I'm working with small cow-calf producers in Texas. We have the dust cloud project, where we're working with feedlots to make sure that the cattle aren't spreading bacteria by stirring up dust clouds. And then I have a new one we call the lymph node project, and I don't know much about that either, other than salmonella seems to collect in lymph nodes of cattle, which causes problems when they grind lymph nodes up into ground beef. So in addition to that, I'm on 2 FAS grants working with the Foreign Ag Service, one in Belize and one in Mexico. I'm writing right now a food security grant and a biosecurity grant for AFRI that are due here in about 6 weeks, I guess. I have 4 master students that are currently working for me and are funded through these projects. I have 4 doctoral students that are the same way. And I'm looking for 2 doctoral students to fill empty positions, and I'm looking for 1 master student. So at any given time, I have from 5 to 10 people that work for me on these projects. And so we have just our education group, and we have weekly staff meetings, and we have our goals, and everybody has their own project, and they report back to me, and we kind of run it like a business. Once they come to work, they're given a job description, and they have objectives they have to reach by certain times, and I pretty much just manage them. I don't really get too involved in anything else other than just making sure they stay on target as far as the things that they have to produce that I have to provide for these grants. And so it's kind of like having a graduate student that teaches your class for you. I create the syllabus and all the outline and everything, and I hand it off and make sure they do it correctly, but it really frees up my time for more creative things. And I'll talk about some of the things that we provide for these grants in a second, but it would be a waste of my time and resources for me to sit down and create a survey instrument and administer that to a group of people, collect the results, write those results up. If I can hire somebody to do that, make sure they do it correctly, and teach them in the process, then it's more efficient for me, and it's also more beneficial for the student because they get their hands dirty, so to speak, and get involved in doing some real world research. So how did I get into this? I talked about the class I took. I talked about my wife as being a personal connection, but honestly, most of the stuff I do now, and most of the stuff I started with, was really with people who expressed a need for an education person. And I work now with a group of about 6 people, almost exclusively, because we generate enough work that I really don't have to go out and look for additional stuff. But that group of people came from a group of friends, a group of people at the university that we hung out with, that we had dinner with. They have kids about our age, and most of our conversations sound really weird to people when we're sitting around the dinner table. We talk about trichinella and swine and the impact on the markets and things like that. And it's not a normal conversation you would have with your neighbors on Saturday night, but that's kind of the world we live in. Those of you who are doctoral students and are going to go into academia will discover that academics is not a job and I would even argue it's not even a career, it's a lifestyle. It's something that defines who you are and how you associate with the people around you. For good or bad, it can be all encompassing. It's difficult sometimes to separate your private life from your professional life. And there are times when you don't want to do that, when your professional life becomes your personal life and vice versa. I seem to be in that mode at the moment, that most of my friends are people that I work with. Most of our private conversations tend to be about work-related things. Some people would look at that and say, gosh, what a horrible way to live that you never get away from it. I would say, yeah, if you hate what you do, that would be horrible. I love what I do. I absolutely love it. I'm constantly pushed into this creative mindset where I'm forced to think about solutions to problems, and I love what I do, so I don't mind it. There are other ways to, if you're in academia, there are other ways to manage your career, certainly, but this is what I've done, and it's what's worked for me. And I'll tell y'all too, if at any point y'all have any questions, just feel free to stop me, because I could go on and on about this. If y'all have anything that comes up, just give a shout out or wave your hand or something like that.
I'll flag you down. They seem to be soaking
Okay.
in right now.
Oh, so by the way, this is my Halloween mug. The Nightmare Before Christmas. My daughters gave it to me. Okay. All right. So you're probably sitting there saying, well, that's all great and wonderful, but what do you actually do? I get that a lot, actually. What do you do when you're doing this research? Well, some of the papers that I've given you, I'm gonna kind of walk you through a series of them and give you about the last 7 years of my life and what I've done over the last 7 years. And this is by no means a model for somebody to try to replicate. What it is me finding my place and realizing that ag education, big A, big E, includes an awful lot of things. And I've been lucky enough to find something I enjoy that I can apply. And that's really going to be up to everyone to do that on their own. These are the things that have worked for me, but it's certainly not the end-all be-all. It's really a mindset of looking at the theories that we have in education and communications, looking at the problems that I encounter, and trying to determine how can I use these theories about adult education or diffusions of technology to solve this problem. And when I can do that, and I can write that into a grant, we go beyond this production mode of just creating an extension publication to actually solving problems and coming up with answers for a dilemma and making the hard science that my colleagues do more beneficial. We are the connection in education between the science and the people. That's always been our role. We've kind of allowed ourselves in the profession to become a disseminator, just taking this information and spewing it out. And what we need to realize is that through our research, we have the ability not only to provide information to people, but to make that information more effective. And so take a look at, I think Dr. Murphy gave you a paper by a gentleman named Mark Russell, who is now a faculty member at the University of Arkansas. Mark was one of my first doctoral students, and several years ago, we sat down and started looking at how do we do needs assessments. So one of the tools that as ag educators we have in our tool bag. And if you've had program development, you know that one of the first things you need to do when developing programs is determine what the needs of the population are. And so we went through several different trials of conducting needs assessments, and I really didn't find anything that I liked. I couldn't find a method that fit my populations. And I was working with cattle producers, and I was working with feedlot managers, and I was working with meat packing plant employees, and nothing really seemed to work well. And so what Mark and I were able to do was really develop our own method. And So this paper, you can take a look at it if you want to, but basically what we do is we determine what the knowledge level of our population is. And we do that by developing multiple choice tests about the topics and administering that to the population. Now, with Mark, we were working with feedlot producers about how to minimize this dust cloud that cattle generate. I had no ability whatsoever to come up with questions that would make sense. That's not my area of focus. And so I had to work with my group of scientists and really pull those questions and pull that content out of them. And we used a lot of other tools for that. We did a Delphi with a group of researchers to come up with topic areas for a workshop. We had them brainstorm questions within those content areas. We went through several iterations to get down to our knowledge test. And once they took that test and were able to score that, we went back to our scientists, and they had created these curriculum concepts and what I later termed our workshop content. And I asked them to rate how important those content areas were. And so then what Mark did was he, on a matrix on probably about page 7 or 8 or somewhere in there, pull it up, 6, 7, 8. On page 10 of that paper, you see that he created a matrix based on what Ruth Whitkin did with some early needs assessment work. And basically what he did is he plotted how much they knew about the topic versus how important the scientists thought that topic was. And what we were able to do was identify the critical needs for that population. And that really gave us the ability for a very specific group with a very specific goal in mind to identify what was most important, what they needed to learn the most about. And that really gave us the ability to create a very specialized workshop just for those people to address their needs. So early on in my career, I worked with needs assessments, and I still do. It's important with a lot of our program planning, but we didn't just take the top model or another needs assessment model and apply it blanket just broadly to every situation. We really tailored that to our population in order to make it more effective and to make it more meaningful. We also realized that if we wanted our workshops to be well done, that student satisfaction was a component. If you look through your papers, you have one titled Texas Tech HACCP Workshop. This is an instrument that we created based on the satisfaction attainment theory. And something I've always tried to do as we've developed instruments, we've measured outcomes, is to base those in someone else's theory. So many times we think, well, here's what's important and here's what we want to do, and we create instruments, but they're not really grounded in anything. And so we've always tried to really base those in the work of other people. The satisfaction attainment theory is basically a model that gives us 3 different construct areas for measuring satisfaction at workshops. Great for us. So it was already out there. We put this instrument together, and we use this now for every workshop that we do. And it measures satisfaction in 3 content areas. And honestly, I can't tell you what those are. It's the first group of 5 questions, the second group, and the third group. And it has to do with facilities, time invested, and then overall satisfaction, I think, is the constructs of those. So we're able to measure those. The next thing that we got to thinking about was, well, we have some presenters, because I'm working with these hard scientists, and they're developing the content and they're delivering it, and I'm just kind of sitting in the back of the room. I noticed real quick we had some that were better than others. And being trained in education, I thought, well, gosh, there ought to be a way that I can help these people become better teachers, better presenters. How am I going to measure that? I don't know. And we looked and looked and looked, and man, we really struggled. We started with what students use to evaluate me, my teacher satisfaction scores. Those things are really weak. I don't put a whole lot of faith in the scores that we get as faculty, just because of the way the instrument's designed. So we put one together, and this one starts at the top. It's a table of words. It's based in Rosenshine and First. Clarity, variability, enthusiasm. And so the students are able to score each presenter on that. And that really gives us good feedback to be able to tell the presenter, hey, you're great on clarity, which most of these basic scientists are, but you stood up there for 4 hours and talked with a PowerPoint. That's not much variability. I would suggest you do this or do some hands-on things. And it kind of gave us some feedback availability for our presenters. Okay, so now you have a PowerPoint page that's a model, and it says prior conditions, interventions, and outcomes. It's a flow chart, basically. This is where we got to about 3 years ago, I guess. We realized that as we started collecting all this data, that we were basically developing a model for how effective workshops were. And so we looked at things like prior conditions, student characteristics. We were already measuring presenter effectiveness. We were looking at student satisfaction. But I realized that if you really want your workshop to be effective, you got to look at two other things. You got to look at, first of all, behavior change. Did your workshop have an impact on that student? Did they do anything differently than they were before? And then, if they did do something differently, did it have the outcome that we wanted? And so one of the things in our dust cloud workshop was we told these feedlot managers that they needed to pour concrete in their loadout area, because most of them right now are dirt. The cattle they start loading up the cattle, dust boils up around them, the dust settles on the carcasses or on the hides, and it has E. coli in it, and all the cattle get contaminated. So we taught them that. We gave them a post-test when they left. They said they learned it, but we had to go out and look at the feedlots to see if they concreted their loadout area. Did it implement behavior change? And then finally, we have to look at product change. Well, we think that putting concrete down is going to help, but does it? So we had to measure the E. coli on the cattle before and after, and to see if it had the impact we wanted. Unless that happens, we're not effective. We have no impact whatsoever. We could teach them the best things in the world. They could pass every test we gave them. They could be completely satisfied. But if it doesn't have the outcome that we intend, we did something wrong. We need to go back and rethink. And so what this model then does is it allows us to quantify all these boxes and to put numbers into all these boxes. And this is when things start getting really cool, especially from the USDA's perspective, because they haven't seen this kind of stuff before. And so when I write this into grants that, here's our outcome, we're going to do a workshop. Well, anybody can do a workshop, but when we start talking about measuring the impact of that workshop from a pathogen standpoint, we're going to measure E. coli, and we're going to equate it back to how effective our workshop was. Wow, their eyes light up then, because now we're doing research in education. We're not just providing a product. And this is the one thing I would tell you that has really given us the ability to be successful in the last 10 years in getting grant dollars, in being able to produce this entrepreneurial effect of generating dollars back to the university, is doing real research within education and not just providing ourselves as a production facility for the hard scientist. They're beginning to realize, the people that I work with and the corollary people, that there's a real benefit to what we do. And it is the outcome that USDA has wanted, involving social science together with hard science. But boy, it's been a long road. USDA has understood it all along, but a lot of our friends in the biological sciences has been a lot tougher sell of getting them to that point. Okay, so I'm going to show you some of the outcomes of this, and then I'll be done, and y'all can ask any questions that you have, or we can discuss anything else you want. So hold that model, keep that in hand, and realize that numbers from that satisfaction test, numbers from presenter effectiveness, numbers from a pre-test, post-test would all fall into those boxes on that model. Okay? Now, pull out a piece of paper that says, where'd it go? Well, now I've lost it. Okay, it's in Spanish. It should be pretty easy to find. Now, my Spanish is not very good. I'm working pretty hard on it, but it's not very good at the moment. I can't tell you what these questions say other than the individual words. This is an instrument that we basically borrowed from someone else, a lady named Britta Ball at the University of Guelph. Do y'all have it, Tim? Okay, well, let me just tell you this. I got a 39-question instrument with a 7-point Likert type scale, and it's all in Spanish. So just put that in your mind.
Okay.
We stole it from, with her approval, we stole it from a lady named Britta Ball at the University of Guelph. And it is specifically designed to measure climate within agriculture. And by climate, I mean people's attitudes toward a specific thing. So this one is framed toward the meatpacking industry and food safety. And so it asks questions about how much resources do your managers put into food safety things? How important is food safety at your plant? Do you take time to wash your hands? Do you take time to change your gloves? And it basically gives us a perception of importance on food safety. So if you look back at your model, on the far left-hand side, you see a box that says culture and climate. That's referring to organizational culture and climate. So this is another way that we have of measuring as a precursor to how effective that's going to be. And what we're finding is it's awesome. Packing plants that score highly on this instrument, meaning they have a very positive appreciation of food safety, our workshops are almost twice as effective than plants that score low on this instrument. So what that tells me is I give this before we even show up, and if they score low, I've really got to think about what I'm going to teach and how I'm going to teach it. If they score high, man, I can jump right into the advanced stuff because they're going to be willing to listen and learn and be really open to that. If they score low on it, then I've got to do a whole bunch of groundwork first to convince them of the importance of food safety. So it's really coming out with some good numbers that hopefully will be published here in the next few months. Look at another table that says it has table 2 and table 3 on it. I was just able to plug these numbers in last week. Now, when you look at your model again, this would go into the behavioral box. It's where these numbers would plug in. And so we're working with a plant where we've done training in the past. We've done actually 2 types of training. At the first plant, they scored really poorly on that climate study. Their numbers were, on that 7-point scale, they were 1s and 2s. They had no appreciation for food safety. So if you look at that top table, we went in and we did behavior checklist. Were the people actually doing the things we wanted them to do? Did they wash their hands? Did they change their gloves? Did they sanitize their knives? So over the course of a year, while we did training, we looked at those scores, and guess what? Nothing happened. We trained the crap out of them, and they didn't do anything differently. Nothing. You can look at those p-values off to the side. No difference. Math. So 100 yards away was another plant. And what was awesome about this was we had 2 privately held plants in very close proximity to each other, same type of cattle, same size, basically the same number of workers in each plant. And so we had a really good group comparison. At the second plant, they scored really high on the climate study because the management there is really interested in food safety and really promotes it. Well, look what we found there. We had 2 categories: dressing procedures, which is sanitizing your knife, making sure you don't rub the carcass against something dirty, washing it off, things like that, and interventions, hot water washes, steam cabinets, and all kinds of stuff that you do in meat processing. We had a huge impact on these people. They implemented the changes that we suggested in the workshop. It was awesome. And what amazed me was they got the same training that the other plant got. But because of their attitude that they had before we ever got there, our training was more effective or less effective. Sometimes we walk into training and we just say, okay, these people need this, here we're going to go do it. And we don't consider the characteristics of the students. And so all of these numbers start to fall into this model. And okay, I'm going to show you the last table, and we're going to talk about that, and then I'm done. You'll see a bar chart, a line graph with a couple of bars on it. That's at the bottom on the x-axis says winter, spring, summer, and fall. Those numbers on the line chart are salmonella contamination. And it's on a scale of from 0 to 100%. So what that says in the winter is that in this plant, in the meat locker, in the cooler, the first time we went and took samples, 80% of the carcasses had salmonella on them. You wonder why you get sick in Mexico? 80% of the carcasses had salmonella on them. 100% of the hides of the cattle had salmonella on them. So what that says is when they walk in the door, 100% of them, or no, 90% of them were contaminated. When we put them in the cooler at the end of the processing, 80% of them were still contaminated. That's not good. We know that they're coming in dirty and they're leaving just as dirty. That's not good for public health. It's not good for us. So we went back in the spring. That day, I don't remember how many they killed, 100% incoming, 100% outgoing. That's pretty nasty. I mean, it is pretty nasty. Okay, so after the spring, train their managers. And we told the managers some things that they needed to be doing. And we saw a pretty good decrease. But what was important is not a decrease, on the percentages, but the separation between the two. The separation is what's important. We can't really do anything about the cattle before they get there. But what we can do is be able to separate those two lines so that once they get there, they're able to clean them off and reduce the amount of pathogens on that finished product. Okay, so what you see then is a decrease and a widening of those 2 points. Then we went back. After that observation, we trained all the workers on the line. And we showed them how to dip their knives, and we showed them how to wash the carcasses, and we showed them hands-on how to do some things. And look at that. I just got back last week. I got these numbers yesterday, and I was literally yelling, running down the hall, hey, look at this. What we see is over the course of a year, the salmonella on the hides as the cattle walk in the door remained about the same. It's above 80%. 80 to 90 to 100% of the cattle are contaminated. But what we did with the worker training and the manager training was cut that in over half. We went from the first time we went, or the second time, of 100% down to 38% of the carcasses. Now, in this country, that's bad. 38% of the carcasses are still contaminated. But oh my gosh, we've cut it down from 90 or 100% down to 38. So we're finally able, in our model, to plug numbers into that last box. Did we have an impact on the product? What this shows is yes, we did. And it also shows that training the workers on the line is a whole lot more effective than training the managers. And so it gives us some direction for what we need to be doing and how we can continue to work with this plant to make changes. Now, I've talked about a lot of things that are outside my area of expertise. Sampling cattle for pathogens, E. coli counts, salmonella, all those things. How do you get involved with people like that? And that's really the question that y'all have. Not necessarily how I did it, but how do y'all do it? First of all, I'll tell you there's many contextual areas in ag. It's not just food safety. It's not cattle. It's not swine. It's not sheep. It's not just plant science. If you look around your college, every single one of those departments, every single small unit in that department is an opportunity for you to get involved. We have people here that are working with wind engineering. They're working with castor seed production, which is what you get ricin from, but it also makes a great oilseed crop for bioenergy. We have people that are working in different contextual areas lending their experience, like what I've talked about today, to that area. It doesn't just have to be with food science. That just happens to be the thing that I work with because of my contacts and my prior experience. So what I would tell you is, think about what you're interested in. Think about what you enjoy doing, because you're going to be doing a lot of it. It's like a dissertation. You better love it when you start, because you're not going to when you end. Think about what you like. Think about where your experiences are. Think, if you grew up on a cattle ranch, or you grew up on a cotton farm or a rice farm, or whatever it is that you have some experience with, get to know those people in your college. Go seek them out. Look them up on the web. Find people with those types of interests. Go look them up on the internet. Look up their publications. Find people that are doing grant work, that are doing funded research in an area that interests you. Go look them up. Go find them. Go talk to them. Find out if there's a spot for you. And I guarantee you, if they're submitting USDA grants, there's a spot for you. They're going to require you. Google search those people, find out what they're authoring, find out what their research is in. And also, the last thing I will tell you is, if you get involved, for instance, in poultry, and you're working with poultry researchers, go to the poultry meetings, the Poultry Science Association. Go to SAS and go to the animal science section at SAS, at Southern Region. Get to know those folks. Make yourself valuable to them. That's the only way you're going to get involved. All right, Tim, I've used up all my time talking about myself. What questions do y'all have? What can I do to clarify any of the garbled stuff I've said?
Let's see what they say. Here near the end, Dr. Shin came in. I think he might have been down with Mickey Fern this morning.
Hey, Dr. Shin, good to see you, sir.
What questions do you have for Dr. Brashears? And confine yourself to his talk if you can. And if not, just anything that's occurred to you that you'd like to ask Todd. Anybody, anyone?
I've scared them, hadn't I? They all have that deer in the headlight look.
Megan sort of looked like she had a question.
I was kind of curious about your recommendation to go talk to people in the other areas. But as a graduate student, do you think they would be receptive to a graduate student helping them, or would they be looking more for, a professor?
Could you hear her okay?
Let me see if I got the gist of it. How do you make those connections as a graduate student?
Well, not how do you make those connections, but do you think they would be interested in graduate students as opposed to professors?
Would a professor in one of those sciences be interested in a graduate student approaching them, or should it be a professor?
Well, for a couple of things, for a couple of reasons, I would say yes, they're going to be interested in graduate students. First of all, you're free labor. You're basically going to sell yourself out and, do some work for them and help provide some writing and things. You're going to have some information, honestly, that a lot of faculty members don't. If you think about when old guys like me and Dr. Murphy were trained, things have changed since then. USDA has gone to a model of requiring logic models with all their grant proposals. That's a relatively new requirement. I would hope that y'all have had that, or you will have it in your education. You're going to be able to provide some things that maybe some older faculty are not as familiar with. And in addition, like I said, you're going to be free labor for them. So I think there is a place for you. We include graduate students on grants fairly regularly for a couple of reasons. One, they can dedicate more time to doing lit reviews and writing up stuff that I need. And second, I like to give them that experience of being able to be on a funded proposal, so that when they go out and start looking for jobs, they have that on their resume and have it under their belt.
Anybody else? Y'all being quiet. You're usually quiet. You're being uncharacteristically quiet.
I tend to have that impact on people. So, Tim, I know this wasn't strict entrepreneurialism. I can also talk about some patents I hold and some things that we've done, but those are really corollary to the people I work with. I don't know enough to write a patent or get royalties. That's just kind of some of the benefits of what we've done. but I really consider entrepreneurialism of generating funds for your program to be able to do research, to pay your summer salary, to hire grad students, to develop this almost a corporate mentality of we have to have so much income in order to hire so many people in man hours to generate output. And so we really approach it from a corporate standpoint of I've got to build my little business here of generating knowledge and information.
And just the fact that you'd pursue a patent with someone else is entrepreneurial. You know, I think the spirit of that is that you look for new opportunities to generate streams of income. That's where we're coming down on entrepreneurial activity. Is it's really the spirit of I am going to engage in trying to generate resources wherever I can find them. That's really the entrepreneurial part of it. I appreciate it. Yes, sir.
Tim, Texas Tech allows us to consult. We get 4 days a month officially that we're allowed to do outside consulting work. And because of the contacts and the things I've done, I've been asked to do some consulting work, and it's basically some needs assessments or some program planning for different organizations. What's great about that is that money goes right in my pocket. It doesn't filter through the university. I don't have to spend it on graduate students or travel or anything like that. It's personal income. And so there are opportunities once you get your name out to do those kind of things as well.
If graduate students do consulting, it doesn't have to go through their major professor or the university either, does it?
I don't think so. I don't know if I've had that come up. I don't know if I've had a graduate student that's done that. If they did, they didn't tell me about it.
Yeah. Yes.
I have a question. So, for someone who is maybe applying for a grant to the USDA, what are your recommendations to really have a competitive proposal?
I'm sorry, to really have what?
To get.
Okay. First of all, you need to, whatever program you're looking at, the first thing you need to do is pull up all the funded projects from that, and it's on the USDA website for that proposal. Look at what's been funded in the past and see what they are focusing on, because what they will tell you in the RFP may not necessarily be what they fund on the back side of that. So first of all, look at what's been funded and see where you can fit into that. And I would say for these integrated grants, you're going to need a team of people, at least. If you're talking about a $500,000 grant, you're going to be working with 5 or 6 folks. If you're talking about a $2 to $5 million grant, then you're talking about a team of 10 to 15 people. I was on a $25 million grant last year. There were 54 people that were on that grant. So a lot of what you're going to do as an ag educator is going to be some hands-on applied team building conflict resolution. Because when you start putting big ego PhD people in the same room and trying to get them to come to
we
some
resemble
kind of
that
consensus.
remark.
Yes, we do. Because what you already know is everybody with a doctorate degree is always right and always has the best way to do things. And so for me, I've been a moderator a lot of times in these groups, but you need to put together a good team, first of all, and then assign people parts of that grant to write. And we generally break it up by objective. If I'm writing a grant, I'll do the introduction, and then we might have 5 objectives, and I'll have groups of 2 or 3 that write each objective, and then I put it all back together.
Great questions. Anybody else? Well, let's thank Dr. Brashears before he runs out of time. We really appreciate your time, Todd.
I hope you found something valuable out of all
has
this.
some parting thoughts here, I'm sure.
Well, I think, you know, your concept of working with people in the hard sciences in the agricultural field, I think sometimes we may have folks in here that their context is even a little different than that. But there still is a context in which they should work. That may be the bigger message, is who are your partners? Maybe it's in student affairs, maybe it's in the Corps, it's through the military, or you know, but there's got to be something, some context in which we work. And that context in which we work probably has a subject matter content that is a little different than the process kinds of things that we typically do.
Exactly. And what you already know, Dr. Brashears, is that's where the money is. It's in the contextual area. It's not in the education. And so that's why we have to do this. If there was research dollars in education, we'd be set. But we have a group, like I said, that's working here in wind engineering. And they're doing curriculum for these farmers and ranchers who are selling their sites to the windmills that are coming in. So that's completely, in my mind, outside of agriculture.
So that's a very good example of kind of what I'm saying is it may be your partners may be in engineering. The context is that those windmills are in rural areas typically, and we do have some expertise. We need to have some expertise in that, some integrated expertise in that context, along with our skills in evaluation and needs assessment and program delivery or delivery techniques and all those kinds of things. But we better have some contextual knowledge as well.
And that's why I say you need to look at your experience and your background and what you do. You know, it'd be impossible for me to go and talk to a bunch of engineers. I know nothing about that. But you put me in with a group of cattle people, man, I can speak their language because that's where I grew up.
Well, thank you very much, Todd. We appreciate it. Yeah.
You bet. Always glad to help.
Go Red Raiders.
I hope we have a better week this week than we had last week.
Thanks for softening up Oklahoma for us. I'm sure we'll have an easier time now because y'all be.
Oh yeah, we just stirred them up like a hornet's nest. Is all we did. I tell you what, that was going from the highest to highs to the lowest to lows in 6 days.
Steve Ray said typical tech. That's what the DT stands for.
Yeah. TTU, typical tech. Yep.
Thanks much, Todd.
Hey, we'll talk to y'all later.